And it's certainly an area, a field of endeavor that I think is worth exploring. And yet, in some ways, I'm more interested in who's doing the mapping of that particular territory. And how are they making their maps, right? If we think about the most basic unit of map making in terms of our own experience, what is that? What do we have? What do we use to make maps of reality? How do we do it?
Senses.
Senses. Whew. And how many do we have, and what are they?
5.
We've got 5. 6? The sixth sense. I hear a metaphysical discussion coming up. Oh. We can all agree that we're familiar with the senses: visual, the eyes; auditory, the ears; kinesthetic, feeling senses; olfactory, we just experimented with that at lunch; and gustatory, right? And this is our nervous system. And what our nervous system does as a human being is that interacts with reality. And it has sensations, right? If we look at it graphically, I will demonstrate my great artistic ability by making a picture of this guy. Here's a human being. And if we look at this human being, he's got a visual sense, and he's got over here a big auditory sense, and down here he's got, right? Something happens in the photic receptors of the eye, the kinesthetic senses of the finger. There's a sensation. That sensation goes up into the human biocomputer, which is about 1 kilogram of magic encased in 1/8 of an inch of eggshell right here sitting on your shoulders. And what this does is it creates a map of reality. And then the human, us, we move through the world responding to this map of reality, right? That's what allows us to return to the correct condo tonight, right? That's what allows us to recognize our mother-in-law when we pick her up at the airport. That's what allows us to find our car in the parking lot at the mall, is the map of reality that we refer to. And that map was generated by external stimulus, right? Now, on a very basic level, this is how it goes on. But at a deeper level, these maps of reality become really complex. Like an experience perhaps when you were 7 years old and you were on ice skates and the spotlight was on you and you had this intense experience, that emotional state goes into your map of reality too. And we have a sense, kind of a surface understanding that our beliefs are really maps of reality. Our beliefs guide us through the territory of life. We respond to the world and other people quite often based on our beliefs. Some of those are personal beliefs, some of those are cultural beliefs, right? So there's layers and layers and layers and layers to these maps. But the primary map-making tool are your senses. Your visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory. But primarily in NLP, we explore at great depth the senses, the visual, auditory. And he was in his room in Seville, I think it was, and another guitarist, a very accomplished musician, was visiting, came into his apartments and saw Segovia's favorite guitar sitting there, right? And without asking the master, which was a faux pas to begin with, he went over and picked up the guitar, without dropping it, fortunately, and began to play some really nice riffs, some really good music. And when he finished, he sat down the guitar, he turned to Segovia, and he said, "Well, it's a very nice guitar, but I noticed that the 6th fret is slightly high, and it doesn't give the purest tone, right, on the bass strings." And Segovia said, "Yes, this is true. It makes it unique. And I noticed that even though you had trimmed your fingernails this morning, you didn't file them." Right? This guy could detect whether or not fingernails had been filed. So his auditory sensory acuity was really top-notch. If you consider some of the metaphors we were talking about this morning in terms of Polynesian navigation, and think back 1,000 years ago, These guys would be in a Hawaiian voyaging canoe, and the instrument, their navigational tool, was the body, period. That's it. You know, they didn't have a compass, an astrolabe. They didn't have a magnet, you know, to find magnetic north. You know, current navigation in the ocean is you've got a little thing here, a box with a button, and you push the button, it'll locate you anywhere on the planet within 3 feet with global positioning satellites. But imagine being in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, right? And you've got another 1,100 miles to sail, and you're the only tool that you have. So navigation by these folks was done with the senses. This is it. They had the senses to deal with reality, to follow a map, and to create a map to lead to a destination. So what do you suppose they used visually to navigate? Stars. Stars were they're most precise. The big star helped orient them during the day, which was the sun. It always came up in the east and gave them, you know, directional references. And also the moon, reflection of the sun. But the star patterns at night, the constellations, right? The Hawaiian navigation is referred to as itak in Hawaiian. And a good navigator, I met a good navigator, as a matter of fact. His name is Sam Ka'ai, and he was the first navigator, I think he was the first navigator on the Hokulea, which was a reproduction of a Hawaiian voyaging canoe that sailed from Honolulu to Tahiti in 1983 or 84, I believe it was. And he navigated that whole journey just with his senses. Maps that were all different to know exactly what stars to navigate towards. So they had great visual acuity, right? And this is what made them good navigators. But imagine a night when it was completely foggy, right? It's dark, fog sets in, there's no moon, there's no stars. You're the navigator, what do you do? How do you keep the canoe on course?
Sense of direction.
Sense of direction, exactly. But what do you use to trust it, right? You were saying that you're beginning to trust your emotions and your intuition, right? That's a useful thing to do if you have the evidence of it being trustworthy, right? If we look at a Hawaiian navigator, they trusted their intuitions, but they used their senses to educate their intuition in very precise ways. Wind. And how would you use the wind if you couldn't see?
By hearing?
Auditorily, yeah. You can pick up a lot of information, right? The last time you knew you were on course, if you were calibrating to or kind of indexing the direction of the wind and the position of the sail, and the wind was striking this part of your face perhaps, right, and blowing little tassels in certain ways, to stay on the same course, you'd want the wind in the same configuration. And that could be partly short-range visual, but it could also be auditory. But what happens if the wind changes directions 3 or 4 times or a couple of squalls come back in, and you're not sure whether you're calibrating to the appropriate wind direction or whether it's changed? Then what do you do? And how do you use the waves? Technology. How do you use the waves?
Maybe you feel with, the movement of the boat.
That's precisely it. A good navigator, traditional navigator, when all else failed, no visual, right? The wind, feel, unable to be perceived, would go into a trance and lay down in the back of the boat while they still knew they were on the right course. And what they would do is they would register the movement of the waves in their body, literally in the fluid of their body, because your body can pick up all of that stuff internally. And they'd be in a trance, and this would be a compass. And they would have one hand raised as they lay down. And if the canoe got off course and the body feeling changed, it was very specific. If it changed, they would give the guy on the tiller a hand direction, and he would move it this way, or the sail would be set, until the body felt exactly the same again, right?
On which, there's 6 on each side.
6 on each side, all right? So Brian has with his fingers, kinesthetically, he can detect 6 different pulses in my wrists and diagnose certain energetic flows in my body based on those pulses. Now, if I'm lucky, I could pick up Ricardo's wrist and go, Yep, he's still alive. He's still ticking. So Brian is, through this kind of diligent study, has developed a kinesthetic skill. And those of you in here who are body workers have enhanced this. We've all tended to enhance certain of our senses. Some of us are really good at reading other people, facial expressions, mannerisms, and the way they move. So we've developed our eyes. Others of us who are musicians, there are a number of folks when we were introducing ourselves who play musical instruments, etc., are in the Segovia category. They can detect a lot of auditory differences, right? So our life experiences tends to allow us to amplify preference to one. We call these in NLP, our senses, we call them representational systems, right? Visual, auditory, kinesthetic representational systems, because we use those senses to represent things in our lives, the things that we really have tuned our senses to. So when we begin an NLP practitioner training, we begin with what is, in a sense, the most basic and the most important. The instrument with which not only do you make your maps of reality, but the instrument with which you'll be changing your maps of reality over the course of the next 5, 10, 20 days, right? Which is your nervous system. It goes back to a kind of a classic quote from one of the, what would you call him? Not really a grandfather of NLP. He's more like a mentor to the world of NLP, a gentleman named Gregory Bateson. Some of you may have read Bateson's works. He's written a number of things. He wrote a really important book called Mind and Nature, and in it is the following quote. He says that the argument of this book presupposes that science is a way of perceiving and making what we may call sense of our percepts, right? So science perceives and it makes sense of things. But perception operates only upon difference. It's like the wrist. My sensory acuity, or my sensory awareness, the threshold of it, is only able to detect one pulse, right? If I lower the threshold, I can make greater distinctions and have greater news of difference, as Bateson calls it. All receipt of information is necessarily the receipt of news of difference, and all perception of difference is limited by threshold. Differences that are too slight or too slowly presented are not perceivable. So in my experience, the pulses in the wrist are too slight. I haven't tuned my nervous system. Brian has. For him, they're not too slight. He can perceive them, right? So for me, they're not food for perception. I am totally unconscious of them. It follows that what we can perceive is always limited by threshold. That is, what is subliminal will not be grist for our mill. Knowledge at any given moment will be a function of the thresholds of our available means of perception. Do that one again. Knowledge at any given moment will be a function of the thresholds of our available means of perception. Right? That absolutely determines your level of knowledge, is your ability to make sensory distinctions. Right? It gives the examples that the invention of the microscope or the telescope disclosed what was utterly unpredictable from the levels of perception that were achieved before that discovery. So you think about what world the microscope or the telescope permitted you to perceive. Now we have the Hubble Space Telescope and electron scanning microscopes that reveal worlds that we were totally unconscious of. We had no idea they even... This is a threshold of perception that you can literally continue to lower and lower and lower and lower. And each level that it drops, the more sensory awareness you have, the more the world changes. And it's sometimes difficult for us to really understand the impact of this because we seem so familiar with seeing and hearing and feeling. Well, we just do it, right? And we tend to want to, well, what's the technique, or what's the pattern, or how do we do this, right? This is the instrument that you use to become a master of NLP. This is the instrument that you use to become a master at your relationship with your wife or your kids. This is the instrument you use in business. This is the only instrument you got. And to the degree that you're able to shift these thresholds of perception, then news of difference begins to flow in. Those maps are updated from 1928 to the current date, right? And you begin to respond to things as they are, not as they were represented years ago, right? By virtue of a nervous system, right, that is tuned to a degree of sensory acuity. My wife and I refer to NLP as, particularly the practitioner training, as a strategy for cleaning the instrument of the body-mind. Because what you take into life is your body-mind. That's what you've got. And if the instrument, just like the lens on a camera or a microscope, is smudged and greasy, right? The perceptions are limited. But if the instrument itself is clean, the instrument of the body-mind, then the world is a remarkably different place. So some of the things that we do for the rest of the afternoon on the surface are going to seem really kind of silly because they're so simple. But this is almost an Oriental kind of Zen thing, you know? It's like, well, God, it can't be that simple. It is one of those things that it absolutely is that simple. That to the degree that you can educate your nervous system, it's going to be one of the absolute fundamental indicators of your proficiency as an NLP practitioner. And I say that it looks silly because of the following reason. Dana and Ricardo, could you guys slide your chairs up here for just a moment? And I'll slide this chair over and join you. Facing me, let's see, if you guys are, yeah, you guys, let's see. We'll have Dana be the detector. So Dana, you want to sit in this chair, if you would. All right, Ricardo's going to sit there, and I'm going to sit here, auditorily, or at a certain set point. She's able to make certain elemental distinctions auditorily. And our task is to lower that threshold so she can make more and clearer perceptions and receive more news of difference by virtue of that, right? Now, as we do this, we want to make sure that she's sort of constantly in a state of challenge, right? So let's snap your fingers there for a minute, okay? One more time. Okay, we'll try this to begin with. Now, these are two sounds. Ricardo's making one, I'm making another. All right, and what we're going to do is let Dana hear and listen to both, so she's going to be hearing them. And then she's going to be indexing the sound to the person that made it. In NLP, we call this calibrating. So Ricardo's going to snap his fingers 3 or 4 times. She's going to calibrate to Ricardo, so she knows that that sound goes with Ricardo. Then I'll do the same thing, and she'll calibrate to me. So what you need to do, since it would be a little bit easier to know who's doing the finger snapping with your eyes open, is close your eyes.
Right now?
Yeah, right now. Now Ricardo's going to snap his fingers and then say his name.
Ricardo. 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 Ricardo.
Got it, Dana? Okay, now I'll do the same. Tom, Tom, Tom. Got it? All right, now is there any doubt at all?
I don't know.
Yeah, and why's that?
Because you said your names after it.
She's good. Boy, I thought this was going to be hard. All right, so here's how we're going to work that. In a moment, with your eyes closed, we're going to randomly, one or the other, we're not going to tell you who, they're going to make a snap of the finger, and your task is to guess, based on your calibration, who it is, right? If you guess correctly, the person who did it will say correct. If you guess incorrectly, they'll say no and give you their name. All right, so you can update your map. All right, so we're going to begin. You ready?
Mm-hmm. Tom.
Correct.
Tom.
No.
This is Ricardo. Okay?
Ricardo.
Correct.
That your detector, your pattern detector, wants to be aware of. What are they using to make the distinctions? Because location is only one possibility auditorily. There's lots of other possibilities that you can discover. So now that we know that she's doing that, we're certainly not going to do it again, are we? All right, so are you ready to roll again? Ready, Dana?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Tom.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Tom.
Ooh, you were soft.
Right. So now we know that she's using another, these are called submodalities. So you got the modality, the representational system, auditory, then the subcomponents, one of which is location, also volume, right? So let's carry on.
Ricardo.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Tom. Right?
Tom.
Ricardo. All right. Now we're at the other end of the range. We're at the range where pretty much regularly she's not getting them correctly. That means that she's not learning anything. It's just random. Could be one thing, could be the other, right?
Okay, I guess I go home now.
Hey, I was doing so good just a moment ago. So now what we want to do is make the sound a little bit more dissimilar so she can detect the pattern. In other words, we're not trying to make sure that she never gets it right. What we're trying to do is stretch her awareness. So in terms of this exercise, where you want your pattern detector to be is at about 70% correct, maybe 75, something like that. If they're getting them all right or all wrong, nothing is happening. There's no news of difference. They're not really calibrating to any distinctions of significance. So we'll carry on just a bit more, okay, Dana?
Ricardo.
Very good. All right.
Tom.
Correct?
Tom.
Ricardo.
Tom.
That was Ricardo. Okay? Now, just to...
Was
I'm
you?
sorry. It was? Well, where was I? Correct.
Now I'm totally confused.
Exactly. Let me offer a brief recommendation that if you start to process the stimulus for too long, right, what do you start doing? You start go with whatever your first impression is. Just the quicker. Speed is important. Can be really important. You start trusting your senses rather than having the mind figure it out. Because if you've processed this information for more than maybe 2 seconds, it's like flipping a coin because you're so far removed from the stimulus. Okay? If at any point during this little round here, your pattern detector is perhaps losing the calibration, it's fine to stop and recalibrate. Okay? So we could do that again, and we'll give you Ricardo a couple times. Go ahead.
Ricardo. Ricardo. Ricardo.
Okay? And then Tom, Tom, Tom. All
Now
right?
you guys are in the same location, aren't you?
Yep.
Okay.
Okay? So you want to have your guess really quick.
Okay. Oh, guess right now?
Yeah. That's what quick means, yes.
Ricardo.
Very good. Okay, ready?
Tom.
Correct?
Tom.
Ricardo.
Ricardo.
Tom.
Tom.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Correct.
Tom.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Tom.
Tom.
Ricardo.
Tom.
Ricardo.
Ricardo.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Tom.
Tom.
Ricardo. Okay, so now what we're getting to be aware of is that location is the one that she's using the most. So what we want to do, right, to kind of eliminate that one is start producing these from the same location. All right, so carry on just real briefly. Go ahead.
Tom.
That was Ricardo.
Ricardo.
Sorry.
Tom.
Ricardo.
Okay. Ricardo.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Tom.
Tom.
Ricardo.
Ricardo.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Correct.
Tom.
Correct.
Ricardo.
Correct. Very good. Now that one was particularly good because his volume matched mine, the location, and there was just an instant of hesitation and boom, she blurted it out. Right? So, well done, Dana. Way to go. Absolutely. Thank you both for letting us lower some thresholds here. Let's slide those guys back. Alrighty. This is going to be the first little round with two partners. There are going to be 2 pattern generators and 1 pattern detector. Okay? And again, so the guidelines for this are, your intention as the pattern, finger snappers, is to lower this person's threshold of perception by stretching this sense. If they're getting them all correct, there's no news of difference. If they're getting them all wrong, there's no news of difference. You want them to be getting correct guesses at about 75% of the time. So there's lots of different sounds you can use. Finger snaps is just one. You can rub your hands together, right? You can make a tapping sound, part of the body. You can just make up a sound, crumple up some paper, anything that you can reproduce that's pretty much the same, one person to the other, right? And then what we'll do is we'll do a 5-minute round per person. So as we're doing this, and it gets faster once you kind of get streamlined, we'll start, Dana would be doing this for 5 minutes, so we'd switch, and then Dana and I would be generating, Ricardo would be guessing, and finally I'd be guessing. So it's kind of a round robin, 5 minutes each. Okay? Any questions about this? Yeah?
Do you use voice sounds or just doing...
You can give it a shot. You can give a, mba, or whatever you'd like, right? As long as they're close enough to make it a challenge to know which one, and different enough that they are perceiving news of difference, right? Now, a couple of guidelines again. If you're the guesser, do it quickly, right? Because if you don't, and you get lost in internal dialogue, or you start making pictures of one guy's hand and the other girl's hand, or whatever it is, this removes you from the stimulus, and then it becomes a 50-50 chance. Yeah, Ivan.
In the university, when I was studying, they said that the first year was accepted that...
For these small exercises, we've got the outside. There's an area, a little patio area over here. You can do this seated or standing. Doesn't make any difference. You can arrange your chairs any way you want in the room. In about 20 minutes or so, when we get together as a whole group, just reset the chairs with respect to these little blue lines, and we'll be in business. All right? Find 2 partners and lower the thresholds of perception of their auditory representational system.
Keep the same position.
You rotate. Keep the same 3 people.
Once a detector, then
Right. Right. 5 minutes each. This was called Fun with Your Ears, right? I hope you all had some. What did you discover in this exercise? Challenging in what way?
Being able to try to make a guess from
Figure.
a preconceived notion, and then they're trying to switch it, or...
Right. So, this is the point of this whole thing. We're talking about lowering thresholds of perception. Hopefully you all experienced it as a challenge. My question to you is, what were you doing inside to meet the challenge?
Using different senses, not same sense.
All right, so some of you were using different senses, right?
If it didn't work, I use different senses.
Okay, so you'd shift to try to move from auditory to a visual and get a picture of their hands or something?
Yeah, something like that.
All right.
The feeling of like his hand was larger and his hand was smaller.
Okay, all right.
Or intuition.
Intuition, interesting. Yeah, and what was that like? How do you know, Monet, when you're using intuition? How do you know that?
Well, I don't know, because this is pretty much a failure.
That's
It felt like it was right, and then it was wrong.
Uh-huh.
I use my knowledge.
You used
Knowledge.
of?
Musical.
Okay.
Musical.
So
It
you-
was like 2 instruments for me.
Okay.
When they did calibration, I imagined that they're different instruments.
Okay,
And when they started an exercise, I was like completely, I could do that.
gotcha.
Because there are different instruments.
All right. So some of you, just based on life experience, like in this case, she sort of indexed different kinds of instruments, and she used that as her sort of strategy for calibrating.
But not visual,
No, the sound of the instrument.
the sound.
Yeah. Piccolo versus bassoon.
Could you differentiate between different intensity of the sound and still
Yes.
tell the
They
difference?
can tell you, so it's almost, 90%? Correct.
It's good.
Yeah, because sometimes even the same person, but he doesn't produce exactly
Exactly the same sound.
Yeah.
Right. So it's a challenge.
Yeah.
Steel instruments also.
Exactly. So for her, What I'm suggesting is that given her life experience, she has developed a really useful strategy for making auditory distinctions. So one of the things as we progress in the training, you'll have the skill to be able to do is to model other people's behavior and figure out exactly how she does it. So if there are those of you who it was difficult making these distinctions, right, she'd be a good resource to approach so that you can continue to tune in to what's happening. Right? Yeah,
I
Ivan.
also used kinesthetic a couple of times, accidentally or intuitively speaking. Instead of guessing sounds,
Else, you started talking to yourself or trying, I wonder who it was, or was that him again, or right? Does that sound familiar, Brent? Right? And then, literally, it's just you're flipping a coin. You have no idea. You're so far from the stimulus. So whether it's correct or incorrect, the quicker it is, right? Is that, because you had a question about that in terms of scientific research indicates that...
well, yeah, my first guess was 90% correct.
First guess, 90% correct. Okay, this is from a man who has explored it from both directions, from the literature and from personal experience. And personal experience is the final arbiter of your reality, regardless of what you read.
I knew that my textbook sucked.
Yeah, exactly. Now you can see those guys who wrote the textbook don't know what the heck they're talking about.
But is it a fair challenge if they're so good at mimicking each other that their purpose is to trick you?
No, then you have two people that I'd like to talk to after the training. No, yeah, exactly. The intent of this is not to make it difficult to guess your thresholds of perception auditorily. Now, as we're going to do all three systems, visual, kinesthetic next, right? And what you'll notice during the course of this is that you tend to have preferences for one system or another. In other words, some of you are going to be really good auditorily. You got a background in music. Some of you may be really, really good visually. Some of you are going to be very, very good kinesthetically. So as you go through all three rounds, I want you to be aware of which one of these seems to be the easiest or the ones that you have, the lower thresholds in. All right, so to do the kinesthetic calibration, Ken and Amal, would you be willing to just sort of slide your chairs over here and we'll play another little game? With the please do. All right. Yeah, that was my knee.
Okay, here
Close your eyes.
I need you guys to recalibrate.
Okay, great, and he knows. Because you'll do this, and you may have done it auditorily, where it's just gone. It's random, I don't know. Yeah. In which case, you need to recalibrate, to reset the system. So now we'll do it again. So go ahead and you.
Amal, Amal, Amal.
Okay. Tom, Tom, Tom.
Okay. Amal.
Tom.
Tom.
Correct.
Amal.
Correct.
Tom.
Correct.
Amal.
Correct.
Tom.
Correct.
Correct.
Amal.
Correct.
Tom.
Correct.
Amal.
Tom.
Tom.
Correct.
Amal.
Correct.
Correct.
Tom.
Correct. Wow, okay, so he's getting pretty good, right? Now, when this is the case, what we need to do is to make the stimulus closer together so it's more of a challenge. So what we're going to do is we're going to drop back to two fingers, okay? And we'll go ahead and use the other knee, all right? So it's got kind of fresh senses there.
Do you apply pressure when you type?
Yeah, now here's what I'm doing to be as close, I wanted to be different from her. So when she was first touching, she had three fingers. And what did you notice about the differences? How did you detect them?
In the beginning, hers was soft, and after that, they weren't.
Right.
So when I calibrated to hers in the beginning, after that, it wasn't the same. But his pushed straight down and firm, and hers was soft and kind of forward.
Okay.
And then, a couple times you kind of touched with your finger,
Right.
while two of them were up here. And then I got confused because she did that too.
Okay.
And then I started realizing there was kind of an approach where every time his was kind of the same and hers was kind of a little bit different.
Gotcha.
Not only that, but I was peeking.
So these are subsets of the kinesthetic system. Pressure is a big one. Location is a big one kinesthetically. But also direction of movement. He kind of detected a sequence that went in there. So as we were first beginning, I wanted my... All right.
Amal, Amal, Amal.
Tom, Tom, Tom. Ready? You ready, Ken? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Amal.
Tom.
Amal.
Tom.
Okay.
Now we're on to something. All right, recalibrate. Great.
Amal, Amal, Amal. In Arabic.
Tom, Tom, Tom.
Okay. Tom.
Correct.
Amal.
Correct.
Correct.
Tom.
Correct. So you're talking about Helen Keller, right? She never stopped challenging all of them, right? I mean, that was just where she was at. Most of us, if, whatever's going auditorily, it's hard to make distinctions, but they're really easy. Visually, we can do it. We tend to rely on what's easy. Therefore, those systems that could be really enhanced, we tend not to do. So this whole thing is really a challenge to the nervous system and does stretch all of them. So what I'd like you to do is sit forward a little bit so your clothes don't make any noise,
Okay.
all right? And just be real cautious of any sound.
Okay.
And you've already got the calibration, so close your eyes.
I may need it one more time.
Okay, we'll do it briefly. We'll give you 2 calibrations each.
Amal, Amal.
Tom, Tom.
Okay.
Correct.
Correct.
Tom.
Amal.
Amal.
Okay. Amal.
Tom.
Tom.
You guys are good. Tom.
Correct.
Amal.
Correct.
Amal.
Tom.
Tom.
Amal.
Okay. Amal.
Tom.
I don't got it.
Okay, so recalibrate. All right? So we could do that. Yeah.
Can we change something? Because I'm seeing his left hand and it's like this. And every time he's kind of unsure if he's pressing on it. Can you just relax?
You play poker.
Can you just relax his fingers and, so he can...
Well, he's going to use whatever strategy he uses. So it'll be, if you notice something like that in your groups, you can draw it to the person's attention. Like if they'd noticed you, gesture, it's a person, then we'll do a round robin. Thank you. Absolutely. Correct. That reminds me of a story. Remind me to tell you that story, as a matter of fact. I should do that soon. I know, we gotta get a louder bell, right? Come on. So as I was ringing the bell, Jeffrey reminded me of he's going, I was digging, he's going, Tom. And reminded me of a story that occurred at a training a year ago in Colorado, where we had a break, and I went to the restroom, and, at the appropriate time, hit the handle on the urinal, and made a nice little flushing sound, and Adam came in, kind of put his hand over my microphone and said, "You're still on, man." And the room was like amplified, right? And I went, flushed it again, and because they'd just done auditory calibration, I flushed it again and went, Tom. Right? Then Adam flushed one and went, Adam. Tom. Adam. So, calibration can be useful. Let's talk about kinesthetics. How many people, just a sort of a rough comparison, how many people found calibrating kinesthetically with touch easier than auditory? Hands up if you felt calibration, all right? And the others, how many found auditory easier? All right, just about a 50-50 split, about the same. Okay, no major differences here. All right, let's ask this for kinesthetic. What kinds of distinctions were you making? How are you making these choices?
All three of us had something different and did really well when we changed up and figured out, how to do it.
Okay.
Mine was body. She was warmer than he was.
Okay, so temperature was one. All right.
And hers was pressure.
Pressure?
She could feel the pressure.
All right.
And when he started doing really well, he had switched to like finger size.
Okay, so in other words, the sensations kinesthetically tend to have a longer duration. So each one has its uses, each one is different. But when we get into visual, we'll do it in the following way. First, Yvonne and I we want to find a neutral posture. So this is going to be the set point, and this is one that you can get comfortable in, I can get comfortable in. And this is like, this is sort of the neutral set point, right? And we want to remember this because we want to be able to return to this with no changes. So you just remember exactly how your body feels and what it's like to be in this posture. I'll do the same. And you memorize this, all right? And when you feel as if you've got it memorized, exactly what you're seeing, the way that the two of us look exactly right now, you let me know.
Okay.
You got it?
Got it.
Okay, close your eyes. And then one of us or both of us will make a change. And then we'll say, open your eyes, same or different.
Different.
Okay, and now rather than saying what's different, I want you to demonstrate with your body what's different. And then say it.
Ivan Sam.
Okay?
Yvonne.
Great. So you demonstrate it before you say it. Right? Okay? So back to 0, eyes closed. Okay, open.
Your mouth shut.
Thanks, Cheryl. I needed that. That's called metaphoric feedback to the trainer.
Two things. Because your thumb was up and now it's down. And your mouth was open and now it's shut.
Okay. Wow. All right. Now I'm replaying that. And I think actually she's right in both instances. I think she is correct, but it's not the change I made.
Okay.
There is one more change.
One foot's up.
Which one is which?
Right
All right.
foot's up.
Go ahead and demonstrate it before you say it. Exactly. Great. You got it. Okay. Back to 0. Eyes shut. Open. Great, you got it. Don't even have to say it. All right, back to 0. Ready? Eyes closed. Open.
You're frowning.
There's a slightly different facial expression.
That's really what I noticed.
All right. Ha, we got you. Okay. Eyes, let's see, back to set point to 0.
Something sneaky.
Okay, open.
His watch. And your hands are different.
Well, that's amazing because my hands are different. I couldn't remember how I had them. Right? But still are at the 70th percentile. So if they're getting them all or missing them all, you want to readjust it until they can make distinctions about 70% of the time correctly. All right? Same groups, 5 minutes, rock and roll visually. Okay, we're going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to take a 15-minute break. We're going to take a... Okay, we're going to take our exploration of this bell one step further. All right? We're going to do this. Every time you hear the bell from now on, right? At the end of an exercise, at the beginning of the morning, whatever. What I want everyone to do is this with their hand and this with their mouth. Okay, ready? We're going to practice. Ready?
Let's try it. Let's be talking.
Oh, okay. Well, I don't know. You guys are... this is almost... Excellent. Okay, let's see if it's... Keep it... Cool. All righty, thank you very much. Now, let's discuss visual calibration. Right? What was the biggest kind of distinction that you were making visually?
Well, actually, my question was interrelating the three.
Please.
I noticed that my visual and auditory thresholds were much different than a kinesthetic, the touch.
In what way? Different.
I couldn't pick out the kinesthetic very well. I was having a real difficult time picking that out.
Right.
So they were taking their fist and slamming me on the side of the head. But I was just curious what the implications of that mean when you're strong in certain areas and.
You know, I don't know that there's a pat answer for that. In my experience, what tends to be one of the major causes is life experience, right? An example, for example, is Milton Erickson, and you'll hear a lot of stories about Milton. He truly is one of the founding fathers of NLP, and his language pattern use is something that you'll study at depth here. He suffered with polio in repeated bouts during the course of his life. I think the first onset was when he was very young, 5 or 6 years old, and he was bedridden for months. He grew up on a farm in, I think, Michigan, and he had a huge family. 5 or 6 siblings and aunts and uncles were coming over, so a lot of people in the house all the time. He was on the second floor in a small bedroom, right? And he made the decision in life that we were saying about challenge of senses to absolutely enhance every sense that he had. The reason for this was, one of the reasons, was that he was, after one of these, the initial onset and one of the major bouts of polio, he had overheard the doctor talking to his mother outside his bedroom door. And the doctor had made the statement, "The boy will not live to see the sunrise." All right? This is a 5 or 6 year old boy. Right? And his response to it, as he looked out the eastern window, was, "Yes, I will." And he did, obviously. And what he then began to do was to train his other senses, because it turns out that he was tone deaf and colorblind as a result of, polio. So, for example, he learned to calibrate using different other aspects of the auditory to who came in the kitchen door that has screen door on it by the way the screen door slammed, right? He could tell exactly who just came in the house just by the way the screen door slammed. He would calibrate to voice tone, tempo, and pitch, the nuances of the voice, by watching the throat. Because a high-pitched voice tends to be up here, the breathing tends to be up higher, and this area the throat vibrates. And a deeper voice tends to breathe down here. There's more resonance, fuller cheeks. So he could tell just by looking at you what your voice was doing. And a lot of this simply arose out of the challenges that he decided to, take on in his life. And our life experience, for whatever reason, tends to orient us in the direction of a preference for one representational system or another, right? But the thing I'd like you to think about in terms of, we've been talking about them as senses or as representational systems. Another way I'd like you to think about them is resources. Because these senses are what happens here. Nothing else happens here except these efferent nerve flows that come in through your senses. So you know probably enough about, primary sensory acuity begins to accomplish this, right? But it also has very subtle but incredibly powerful consequences in your internal life. Because when you think about the maps of reality that you make them based on what you're perceiving in the world. In other words, the ability to make really good external distinctions enables you to make really fine internal maps. Consider an architect. An architect, a good architect, can do amazing things visually, right? He can look at a piece of cleared land and envision a 20-story precise room location, everything, just this whole shot, and then transfer it to blueprint paper. He can make amazing visual distinctions. And one of the reasons that he can do that is he has the ability to do that externally with his eyes, right? There's, in a sense, the way you use your senses externally is reflected by the way that you make maps internally. And the richness of your internal maps and their kind of timeliness is really critical to your well-being, your ability to communicate, your happiness, right? It's the way that we update these maps of reality that we were talking about. Other commentary about, which is what kind of a word, see, hear, feel? Hear. It's a hear word. And she says, but I make a lot of visual distinctions. Okay.
That's why I was...
Okay.
Because I was thinking you were saying auditory.
This is great. No, you were thinking what I was thinking about her saying about auditory?
And then what he said was...
So that's why we used what we use in NLP is referred to as sensory-based language, right? You've got to find out precisely what's going on in their map of the world, right? And this takes some exploration.
Can you just add to this thing, like
yes.
A personal example from life when I was sitting in the university lectures, sometimes when the professor was very boring, anyway, when he was telling lectures, I was visualizing everything he said. When it was very, very boring, I just automatically, unconsciously, I just made some kind of other stories, other pictures. So maybe when stuff is not interesting or it's kind of boring, you're kind of stressing.
I thought about that too, because I've done that a lot throughout my life in classrooms, everywhere. When something is boring, even in parties, when people are boring, I just leave. I do something else.
That's kinesthetic, huh?
Great. So she's going to be the barometer. If we see her get up and walk towards the door, we know. Well, check this out.
But no, that's not true either. If I leave, I may have pain in my body.
Oh, okay.
I cannot sit in the same position for a long time, so don't take it.
Right, so we need to calibrate once again to find out what's really going on, right? Exactly.
Is it true that visualization, a person can be good in visualization, but one can be very detail-oriented, and
yes.
another one will see the big picture.
Absolutely.
And these details, and
absolutely.
both of them are very visual.
Exactly, yeah.
People.
Yeah, I mean, and this happens in all systems. Some of the folks working with the kinesthetic, I got a comment in a group that what they were detecting was pattern or sequence or strategy in the way that these signals were being fired off. And the person's doing really good because the sequence stayed the same. In other words, they were feeling the big picture. Which system you tend to prefer, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, or which ones you'd like to enhance, right? And then you begin to enhance it. You begin to work towards that. So let's talk about that for a moment in terms of, okay, now you have this information, right? What are you going to do with it?
Okay.
Because...
Is it better to take it one by one, focus on one thing, and enhance it, and then when you feel you are confident, go to the next one, or work on all the three together?
My recommendation is at the outset, you tend to chunk it small. Smaller steps at the beginning and then integrate. Well, what is it? Right? But you've got to be able to notice it first. That's the key.
Oh, and that's going to expand your knowledge.
Yeah.
Since you notice it, and then...
Exactly right. Right. And that's what you do, because humans want answers to difference. They want to integrate these differences with their maps of the world, with the way it is. Now, the other thing that doing sensory acuity exercises does is that it puts you in what in NLP we sometimes refer to as uptime, as opposed to the difference between perception and conception. The senses are perceptual things. They give you perceptions. And then what the mind does with perceptions is that it creates concepts or maps. The perception occurs before the conception. And the cleaner the perception is, the more distinctions there are perceptually, the richer the maps are internally, right? Let's say a person that has difficulty calibrating visually, or they just don't notice those kinds of distinctions, might not be able to tell the difference between when their son need the sensory acuity to go outside to notice what's happening, rather than make assumptions about what's happening inside your own map, right? So the thing about sensory acuity and calibration. Calibration means what does what you're seeing mean, right? In other words, is this anger over here? Is it confusion? Is it happiness, right? What does this configuration actually mean? That's a calibration to your perceptions. These will stay with you absolutely during every moment that you do NLP. In the master practitioner training, they're doing at a slightly different level themselves. I mean, if I were to, kind of venture a guess about everyone in the room based on what you shared this morning about why you're here, I don't think there's a person in this room that wants to go home with the same map of reality, right? So it is about constructing a new one. We had some comments about maps that were kind of tattered and torn and kind of flew out the window of the car as you're driving. And sometimes this can be a godsend because it's a blank sheet. You can create the map any way you want, right? You don't have to piece it together from anything. But there's two sides to NLP. One is the transformation that you yourself make. The brain's a mysterious thing. I don't really have the answer to that. I mean, I think a medical kind of explanation would probably serve better. Now, the thing that I would be interested in, however, is if he could take his phantom arm and someone could hold out a plate that he couldn't see into that had a number of quarters, hold it out to his phantom arm, and if he could reach out with his imaginary fingers and touch him and tell him exactly how many coins, that would be interesting. Wouldn't it? That'd be cool.
Just spooky.
Spooky. All right, now, what we've said, we're beginning to imply, is that the ability to make external distinctions enhances your ability to make internal distinctions. And a lot of the NLP training that you're going to be exploring has to do with the internal changes you make. So Cheryl, could you give me you've been up once before. Would you like to come up again?
Is it scary?
No, we don't get the snakes out till next week, right? Okay. No, this is actually it's a great exploration because what it has to do with is internal awareness. Mm-hmm. You've had a lot of practice kind of going outside with your senses, right? Well, I know there's plenty, but we're gonna, for demonstration purposes only, we'll do 3.
Okay.
So a third one.
Okay.
All systems go, no conflict. You were just there. Mm-hmm. Be aware of what's happening in your body. Mm-hmm. Okay. Great. And compare it to the other 2 experiences. Notice what's the same. Mm-hmm. All right. And give me some feedback. What are you noticing or experiencing inside that is the same across all those experiences of congruence?
Peace.
Okay. And where do you feel that?
All over.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All over. In exactly the same way? Or?
In those 3 instances, yes.
Okay. What else was going on in the body?
Relaxed.
Okay. And what? I mean, it was like the whole, any particular?
My arms, my legs.
All right. Extremities then, the arms, the hands and legs. Mm-hmm. Okay. Sort through it again.
Pulse was speeding up.
Okay, that might have been a little bit about being up here or whatever, but I'm going to check it out.
Okay.
Again, you're sorting for what was common in those experiences in terms of feelings. Anything besides sense of peace, relaxation, the extremities?
Perfect.
Perfect?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a word, and how does it feel inside?
It felt in tune.
Okay.
Just the way it was supposed to be.
All right, great. And did that feeling of being in tune the way it's supposed to be, were you more aware of it in one part of the body than the other? I mean, like more of it in the head, more of it?
Probably in the head.
Okay, but check it out. It could have been in the...
No, in the head.
In the head, the sense of...
In the mind.
Okay, in the mind. All right, so a sense of peace, was it? Okay, great. All right, so I want you to allow yourself to memorize that feeling in your body. A sense of peace, relaxation of the extremities and the hands.
Okay.
Right, that peace in the mind. Okay, and take a deep breath for a moment. And then sort for any similarities of incongruence.
Okay.
Okay, and what is the same? What feelings or what is the same about those two?
Irritation.
And how do you experience that internally? Is it a region of the body? Is it all over? Is it a tingle? Is it a warmth? Is it a pulsation? What is it?
Pulse.
And where mostly? You went like this, okay?
Yeah, probably through here.
Right.
You know, my breathing speeds up.
Right. Now, if you noticed, and this often happens with an individual, their unconscious is going to give you the answer before the conscious mind. I said, where do you feel this pulse? She said, and she just flow in that direction. Okay?
Okay.
And this was, again, a sensory acuity exercise, relatively brief, but you went inside rather than going outside. So you make distinctions not only externally, but inside your body too.
And I could definitely tell a difference.
Absolutely. And the thing is, there are very subtle differences, but they're absolutely there. And just like on the outside, you can make cleaner and cleaner and finer distinctions in what you see, hear, and feel. The more you explore the internal states, the more precise you can be about exactly what's happening. What's happening in the muscles of the face, what's happening in the fingers, the legs. Change one, the other two change two. Cool, thanks. Great. All right, we're going to be doing this with a partner. Right?
There are two more things you kind of didn't say. When you asked her to go into incongruent state, she made a gesture like this behind her back, which is holding yourself in your arms, and then she went this, which is a disappointment.
Right.
So these are the things.
Right. Now, and the other thing is that on the outside, as Ivan is noticing, we're making distinctions that she wasn't aware of or didn't comment on, the gestures, the hand movements, etc. And they were pretty regular, right? For the other to experience an experience of congruence, and you're going to identify the internal signals, what's it feel like, and outside you're going to be noting the external cues. In other words, what do you see when the person's in these various states? And you want to repeat this for 2 or 3 different experiences of congruence. And what you're looking for here, or you're having your partner look for, is what is the same, what is common to all the experiences of congruence. Because some of them could be kind of state-specific, you know, when they were on the beach versus when they were, you know, walking through the forest. But they're going to be common threads, right? So you want to ask them what's common to all experiences of congruence. You're going to have them do that and let their body memorize it, and then you're going to repeat with 1 or 2 experiences of incongruence, and you want to make sure to be the guide to put them in a more resourceful state. So it's a perceptual filter challenge for the observer. In other words, you have to use your sensory acuity. For the explorer, it's a way for them to begin to notice how fine of a distinctions can you make internally as well as externally. All right, questions about it? Shouldn't take long. Ivan?
For the internal, do you want us to look at just at the kinesthetic?
You can, if there are significant differences auditorily, in other words, it's like the little, you know, dog.
Sometimes the feeling doesn't come to you.
Right. And I'm suggesting one way to do it is to allow yourself to go back to the experience that generated the feeling. And if you have trouble in your small group, call one of the coaches or myself over and we'll make sure you can do it.
So the feelings for the congruence you're trying to get back to is just peacefulness?
Yeah, the hallmark of congruence in NLP is lack of internal conflict, a sense of alignment, a sense of sort of commitment to the moment, totally being there, right? Incongruence is when you're not sure, you've got competing parts, right? Unpleasant emotions that pull you out of the experience, like that. Oliver.
Tom, when we note the external cues, do we tell the person?
Afterwards. Yeah, afterwards. Yeah, give them some feedback about the kinds of things that you noticed afterwards.
So after they tell us what their experience was,
happening
we
inside.
tell them what the external cues.
Exactly right. Okay. Masaryk?
Would it help if the observer write on a piece of paper what they observed?
You could do that if you want. If it's really complex, you could do it. Otherwise, if you feel that you can remember pretty specifically what's happening, that's fine too. All right, this, you notice, didn't take long. Was there one other one, Dana?
Yeah, I just, for me, when I think about trying to go back to an experience, I almost find it easier. I feel like I can get that state almost easier just by getting that state instead of going back. I mean, is that okay?
Yes, you should use that strategy, and later in the training, you should teach that to Masuda.
Yeah.
Right. Do it the way that works. All right, I'm guessing maybe 10 minutes per person. With a partner, someone you haven't worked with yet, different groups, a partner, do one person, then shift, do the other person, right? So we'll be back here as a whole group in 20 minutes, all right? This is also in your notes if you want to track along with it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's do a little discussion and unpacking of this notion of congruence, as words, congruence, incongruence. A word is nothing but a representation of experience. And what this was for the explorer, an exploration of internal experience. So what kinds of distinctions, when you were the one doing this, you don't even know that it's happening unless your sensory awareness is outside observing for specifically that kind of thing. And that's pretty cool. Exactly.
Instead of just sort of rolling along and not being more concerned with what's going on with you,
Exactly.
you're stepping outside yourself.
Exactly, and that's the whole notion of being an uptime or going external with your awareness. Because if you're talking to somebody about congruence or remembering the time you felt great or whatever, and you're inside remembering where you were on the beach with your dog, you miss everything, right? You have no idea what the other person is doing unless you are external with your awareness. All right, other learnings in this little pattern of internal sensory acuity.
There seemed to be a sense of strength, and we became aware of, even if you're not accurate in your belief system,
Right.
if you're congruent, there's a sense of strength. He said I kind of set up like a military guy, but
Right.
He was also talking about a sense of, yeah.
Okay, now, did you use the words if you're not congruent in your belief system? Or
If you believe in what you're doing, even
right.
if you're not correct.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So that's why somebody can be truly evil and very powerful.
Absolutely, and totally congruent, totally committed, no conflict or whatever.
Yeah.
Congruence is not good, it's not bad, it's just congruent. It is, right.
And then we've both been aware of a sinking pressure down and a weakness when we were incongruent.
Right. Right. How many people noticed in the incongruent state something happening down here that kind of contracted or got, that's often an experience.
Even shoulder come down.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like there's a sort of heaviness enters the body. There are commonalities that we all share, and there are some unique differences. Colors, yeah.
Like white color, congruent white and incongruent dark.
Yeah, so exactly,
And
some people...
incongruent was like more details in the picture, and a congruent was not.
Interesting.
It was like more like overexposed picture.
Right.
Like white and not much details, more feeling.
Right.
Like happy feeling.
Right.
And incongruent, more details. I had more people.
So the whole thing, right? Does that change your feeling about that experience in any way?
No.
Okay, so it's the same kind of thing? All right? Brighten it up just a little bit more.
And they put different colors,
All right.
close in them.
Try that and lose a little bit more of the details, so it's kind of like you're moving a little bit further away from it, so you're seeing a bigger picture. Does it have any effect on the... And go back and forth. Now go back to the way it was. A lot of detail, kind of... All right? Then go back to it being really bright, kind of overexposed, and you're at more of a distance. Does that change the way you feel?
A little.
A little bit, all right. Now that's pretty interesting. Play around with the little pictures in your mind, and it starts to affect the way you feel. Right? Most people will have the sense that they feel the way they do just because they feel the way they do. Right? When you get into the whole field, a couple of days of exploration of submodalities, which is this thing of working with internal imagery, you'll learn specific techniques to transform emotional states by dealing with visual imagery. Right? But you can't do that until you can perceive your visual imagery. So sensory acuity is the foundation of everything in NLP. Again, in my shoulders and up here and this area of my chest. All right, which part of your body, we went for an opposite feeling, is most relaxed? And as she sorted through her body, we really didn't even find a state of relaxation, but we found that the thighs, they felt okay, but they were tired, right? Now, it's interesting. Congruence and incongruence are night and day, in a sense, big chunks. But where she was at in terms of her internal perceptions, what was relevant to her was tiredness versus pain. And tiredness is actually much more pleasant to feel than pain. She is doing both at the same time. So she knows right now how to feel tired, and that's better than pain, yeah? So we just began to explore the possibility of, in a sense, the thighs teaching the shoulders how to let go of some of the pain and just feel tired, right? So we chunked it down and made it relevant to her experience, kind of like the calibration exercises. So everything that happens within you is expressed in very unique ways. But unless you have the sensory acuity to notice the pattern, to notice what's going on, then it's very difficult to make any changes in the map. Like with me and my little 1928 copyright map of the beaver pond story, right? If I chose to totally rely on that map, I was going to be in for a very rough day. And many of us, sometimes out of default, because we have no idea what else to do, we continue to use those old maps, and life becomes much less than pleasant. So the first step is pattern detection. Noticing what's going on inside of us and noticing what's going on outside, right? Both are absolutely critical. And then you begin to think about applications of this. And I was thinking, Amal, about medical applications, for example, because I've talked to a number of physicians, and one of the things they say is sometimes it's difficult with patients because they're not able to express literally what they're feeling. Well, it feels kind of sore over here. It's like they don't have real good awareness of what's really even going on in their body. So they can't give high quality information to someone, that's trying to help them in some way. So just some education in this whole thing of being aware